This is our second exhibition by Bernard Canavan. The first one came as a terrific shock to a lot of people. He painting a subject that we had never ever seen painted before, but that a huge number of people identified with, and it spoke to an awful lot of people, many of whom we wouldn't have seen in the art gallery over the years, let's put it like that. So it was wonderful and thrilling to introduce so many new people to artworks. And this show is more or less a continuation of that. It's a great pleasure to have him back. It's a little brighter than the, excuse me, than the last show, but it's wonderful to have this kind of work back again. Quite thrilling, actually. Now, we've always been saying over the years that whenever you want somebody to open an exhibition, it's always very difficult. So, if you can, always ask a poet. Because the poet can usually put their own complete impression on it. They don't start off by saying, I know nothing about art, which is the dreaded word. So, it's a great pleasure to have with us this evening a young man who has made his home in Galway and has made a huge impact on literary circles in Galway, and that is the poet Kevin Higgins. So, over to you, Kevin.
The bribe in the brown envelope for calling me the young man is on its way. I'm not going to say I know nothing about art, but I think one of the reasons I'm delighted to be launching an exhibition of paintings rather than someone else's book of poetry is that while I really love painting and visual art, I don't know how it's done. So you're not going around thinking, how did they do that now? Which is what you do when you look at someone else's poems. And I know for painters probably, I'm sure there are some here, you are thinking about his technique and so on. Now what you can do as an amateur in that sense is just admire what's there. Now I was out reading a story here that's in the noir anthology, Galway Noir Stories, that is set in London, in which a policeman's hand is cut off. It's a bit of a grisly story, and I think that was what led to this invitation. I was born in London myself, and we, in 1967, and we moved up to Coventry in 1974, and that experience of the Irish in Britain is not exactly, it's certainly, it's not romanticized in any sense whatsoever, and it is not talked about to the extent, say, that the Irish in America experience is talked about at all. Obviously you had the notorious signs of no blacks, no Irish, no dogs in the 1950s, and then the intervention of the Troubles, particularly in the West, when we were youngsters in the West Midlands. That was a profound thing. But I think to look and see the world of the brown suitcases which are around here being portrayed, which I would remember, there were brown suitcases like that in my mother's loft. To see that world portrayed is I think a really important thing. Now the other thing, the person who it would make me think of, the Camden Town, the pickup for work pictures, of which there are a few, the famous and great song written by Dominic Behan and McAlpine's Fusiliers, that world, which really is, I think to younger people now, an unimaginable world almost, also being portrayed. And perhaps my favorite painting, I have two, I'm told this cafe still exists, and you can get breakfast for two people for £6, so I want to go there. But also, I absolutely love this painting. No noise, drink, women in the rooms. With the two coming down the stairs, that rule clearly having been breached, and the cat being appealed to please stay quiet. This reminds me of a story my father told me where he, there was some incident with a landlady where he was evicted anyway, and a mirror was broken, that was it. And that the mirror had to be fixed before the tenants left, so it was fixed by putting page 3 of the Daily Mirror over the mirror. And that was the response. I had a few interesting dealings with landlords and landladies myself when I was back in London in the late 1980s and 90s. I think there's a lot of social commentary here as well. I love the title of this painting, number 12. What they warned me about before I left. Now, I'm not sure, was she warned, I think it was her, or was it him? But the thing that strikes me is that these two paintings here, they look a lot more mentally healthy than the group gathered around here of, I think, a meeting of the Irish Cardinals called The Anatomy Lesson, which Bernard tells me was inspired by Mary McAleese's comments about, isn't it odd that when the hierarchy seek advice on these issues, it's always some people who have no experience of them. Of course, as we now realize, there was indeed a lot more knowledge and experience of such things, not always in the orthodox sense, than was thought. And I think it would provoke in me a profound sense of, it would make me remember things that I'd actually forgotten about, and people I had forgotten about, and a profound emotion, really, of connection with that Ireland that I think really died with the Celtic Tiger. That its last vestiges were when you would go through Holyhead before 1994 at 2 o'clock in the morning, or whatever is the train that changed at Crewe, and you come to the sign Prevention of Terrorism Act, and you think, oh, it'll be all right, probably, but. And then you had Riverdance World, and Ireland became cool and groovy, and we kept winning the Eurovision Song Contest, and we suddenly had an economy, and all of that. And then 9/11 happened, and the world, it was other people who were being watched, and it was airports rather than, we all flew as well. We all started flying. Ryanair intervened, and so on. And that world really vanished. But it's not that long ago. Certainly it is within my memory. And I think it's an important political statement as well. And I think realist paintings, and these really are realist paintings, even the cardinals gathered around the woman, it's a different sort of realism, but it is real. That you have two types of realism. You have the realism that romanticizes, the heroic pictures. Anyone who talks about paintings of the real Irish people in the west of Ireland, which was the kind of ideological preference of official art. I see Sean Keating out of there. He wouldn't approve of some of these things, I don't think. And other, obviously, in De Valera and the world, I think sometimes De Valera gets a bit of a bum rap. In the Ireland of De Valera and Cumann Gael, Kevin Higgins, my namesake, who had an unfortunate accident on his way home from Mass in 1927. In that world, you weren't allowed or encouraged to look at the problems, the repression, all of that. So, heroic peasants in their fields looking happy at their work, that's the crucial thing, was the preferred art that was promoted, and the image of Ireland that went out as well. And I think it's interesting that it's always, and much, much worse people than them, the man with the tash in Russia at the time, Mr. Stalin, always liked pictures of happy peasants. The other, even worse man in Germany, Mr. Hitler, happy pictures, not degenerate art, they called the other stuff, and they would probably call that as well. And as a poet, you realize the relevance of that. Everyone who's trying to suppress something or hide it always wants happy pictures of the ordinary people, and nice poems that rhyme, and the two. So whenever I hear those two, uplift, nothing wrong with poems that rhyme, but we want uplift. Why can't you write something nice, my mother would say to me often. Now, on other occasions, she'd loved this exhibition because she went to London in 1960. My father went there in 1959. On other occasions, the more subversive side of her would say, if I wrote a mean poem, which I do a lot of, that'd be a good one to put in the Advertiser now, so that her enemy could get it through the letterbox free. They wouldn't even have to buy the paper. And I think there is, a subversion in its way in these paintings, and I'm totally delighted to be launching the exhibition. And for me, it's also, I think it's great as well that it has some of the small towns and the rural settings where the people left from, and the world they went to, and the journey as well is portrayed. I remember us coming back, I think we came to Galway in 1970 or 71 for a holiday. I would have been very small, and there were cases like that still hanging around. Maybe, perhaps things have brightened slightly, but only slightly. And when we came to Galway in 1974 from Coventry, I always remember that it seemed that we had moved from colour to black and white, and not just in a television sense. We only had a black and white TV in Coventry as well, but that there was a big change in that. And I think for me it brings back all of that world. And I can only wish the exhibition and Bernard absolutely the best. I think these paintings should sell, and they should be on book covers as well, and be that experience, and I hope the exhibition gets reviewed widely too, that it is a very important Irish experience that is not convenient or as discussed as it should be. So, congratulations. And I have been asked to give you this, present you with I'll read this out. DVD for artist Bernard Canavan. This is from the in Cork. You did a painting of Lennox Robinson, and there are DVDs of the launch, including the painting itself, and they've asked me to present these to you, and they want, crucially, a photograph of that.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you very much.
there you go.
Right.
There we go.
Lovely.
Thank you. I'll just take a few.
Yes,
That's
sounds
lovely.
good.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm very honoured. That the people of Cork today, of that library, very nice library, the Douglas Library in Cork, asked me to paint a portrait of Lennox Robinson, a great Irish writer from the. He took over W.B. Yeats's position in the Abbey Theatre, very important figure. The only thing I knew about Lennox Robinson was that he gave an account of how he arrived in Cork once to visit his uncle. And his uncle met him at the railway station in a horse and trap. And his uncle was something of a sportsman and always kept a double-barrel shotgun loaded on the cart in case he'd see anything that would fly over and move around. And a hare crossed the path in front of the cart. He picked up the gun as quickly as shot and fired and shot the horse dead. That's all I knew about Lennox Robinson. I've learned an awful lot since. So there you are. Thank you very much.
Well done.
Do you want me to say a few words about anything?
If you want.
Well, I might as well, since all of you have been
He
kind
said
of-
it's a few words, and I just...
Yes. It takes out a vast sheet of many hours later. No, I haven't got it's just to thank Tom, who's been very kindly put up this exhibition for me. I'm very honoured and very grateful to him because, in a way, he introduced my work to the west of Ireland. I had several exhibitions in Cork, I had some exhibitions in Dublin, but certainly he's been very effective and very helpful in promoting my work here, and thank you very much. And also to Dean Kelly, who has had to listen to me down the phone, putting various ideas and things, has been extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Dean. Janet, of course, needs no thanking at all. I thank her every day, and my wife, who's very kind. Anita Handley, who first introduced me, Anita, to Tom and helped me promote my paintings throughout most of the Midlands and west of Ireland, so thank you very much, Anita. Ted Lucid, who's come all the way up from Cork here today, and missed, I hope you're not missing some very important rugby match. I'm very, very honoured. Well, let me just say just a few things about the philosophical, if you like, the background to these pictures. The background to the pictures are really threefold. First of all, they're autobiographical. I come from County Longford, where my family had a small country shop in the middle of the town. Some people who are grander shopkeepers than I was will remember the shop. It was a little tiny shop, a yard a counter probably we had. And in the 1950s, our customers left in droves. You'll all know about the 800,000 who left in that in two decades. 800,000 people left. I mean, people talk about migration today, but that was really an exodus. So I came to England, and I was deeply shocked, as indeed all these people were. Now, I just want to talk a tiny bit about the background of all these people were. They tended to be, on the whole, the agricultural labourers, the poorer sections of towns. And they had been brought up, as we had all been brought up, to live in a parish world. We knew everybody in the parish, and everybody knew us, but I had never met a Cork man before, honestly. And I had never met a Donegal man, I'd never had to work with them. I'd never seen them, they were strangers to me. And the emphasis was, in small town life in Ireland, was the stranger owes you nothing. The Christian idea should be your neighbour was all mankind. But you didn't have to love your neighbour. Christ said love your neighbour, but actually, if your neighbour was a stranger, you couldn't really be quite sure how he would act towards you. And indeed, many of the employers on London building sites from Ireland were not all that hospitable to their fellow country people. So my paintings are about, I've called this the disembodied, the memories of the disembodied. What do I mean by the disembodied life? Well, I want to just go back and think about what the theology of our lives were when I was growing up in the 1950s. We had a tremendous belief in the beyond. The chief person in the town would have been the parish priest. He would read out, for instance, twice a year how much we paid to the church. That was about charity. But charity was very much how much we gave to the church. So when I came over here, I was totally shocked by, first of all, having to live in an anonymous world. We knew everybody, but we only knew everybody in a small circle. And we would doff our hats to people who were above us. And we would also respect those who were below us as well. There was a sense that we knew everybody, but we didn't have to do anything about knowing them. People in the best part of the town would say, hello, Mr. something, who would be a poor man who lived out the country in a small cottage, or maybe wasn't even married, something. There was no awareness of who you were. What we'd have to do when you went to the new world, and this is modernity. So the modernity is what I want to emphasize. In modernity, you don't know anybody. You don't know your neighbors. I don't know my neighbors on either side of me in the flats in London. And you are coming to that position now in Ireland because we're all the products of modernity. We have left the sense of who we were, left it behind, and we've come to another world. In Galway, I can't imagine. I came here when I first in 1952 to Galway. And I came to your shop, your parents' shop in Galway, and my mother brought me in there, and I bought several books. I was something of a spoiled child because I was very delicate. You don't want a delicate child in Ireland in the 1950s, but I was a delicate child, so I didn't go to school very much. And when I went to school, the master, some of you will remember perhaps the master, we'll draw a veil over that. But he was not a man. He said, "Key will do," when I walked in the door, and I couldn't answer him. And he says, "Come up here," and he gave me 3 slaps in each hand, and I went and did the thing you mustn't do in Ireland in the 1950s. I went home and told my mother. And my mother came back, and my mother was no wilting violet. She came back and she tore strips off him. And he said to me when she went out the door, he said, "I'll never speak to you again." And he was as good as his word. He never spoke to me again. I sat in the same desk, which was very unusual to sit in the desk. I mean, there was a desk for 20 or so, but 40 or 40 kids in the room. And most of the 40 kids, he would say to them, "You will end up in England. Birmingham, Kilburn, Cricklewood," he would go around. So that was the sense of who we were. We were intensely local people. He was aware of what we were. There were no secrets in the town. The town was full of secrets. People mustn't say this about this one. But actually, all the secrets were known. So when you went down the main street and something unusual happened, you went down, for instance, you came from England, you brought a partner or something like that, the curtains would twitch all the way down. But I don't want to disparage that world, because that world was also gave you a great sense of who you were. And when you would go to a foreign country, a country that, let me just give you one statistic. In 1830, the majority of English people first lived in cities. That didn't happen in Ireland until 1973 or 74. So we were primarily a rural world in which we were living with nature. And I remember my mother once went out in the street, there was a man beating a donkey. Savagely, they often beat, trying to get a donkey to pull a load that he wouldn't be able to do, or beating cattle. And she went out and she gave him a bit of a telling off. But nature was put, we were told, nature was put there for our use and benefit. We didn't have to worry about nature. We could do what we liked with it. God had put it there for us. Now in the urban world, we're changing. We're beginning to worry about nature. We're worried about pollution. We're worried about beating animals. We're worried about all kinds of things that we weren't worried about then. So urbanization and modernity has changed us vastly. The problem is, can we live together in this kind of world? Can we, for instance, I have a picture down there showing a priest carrying a laundry basket, which I regard as utility. Laundry baskets were utility. They were things that you charge for and all the rest of it. And there were the Magdalen laundries. On the other hand, there were young men, when I was growing up in the 1950s, who went up to the border, or Handlin, for instance, Sean Southman, Gary Owens, celebrating songs, who went up to shoot people. And they didn't have to ask anybody to do that. It was the law of the heart. You could, if you went up there, you were perfectly right. No bishop would come out and say, "Oh, please, you've done wrong, you should go to jail." The law of the heart was, you could choose what you like. Well, in the modern world, we cannot live by the law of the heart. We have to live by consent. We have to live by laws. And this is what modernity, which really springs from the French Revolution really onwards. The idea of democracy, the idea that this man here, Bronte O'Brien, in the little town of Edgerstown, went to school there and came over and laid down the foundations and the arguments for us living together and living by consultation, living by consulting with the stranger. We depend in many places, and in Ireland increasingly, we depend upon the stranger for our welfare. We depend upon the stranger to give us help if we're ill. I had open heart surgery 2 years ago. And I went into the hospital. I went to a hospital in London, a fine hospital in London, and the surgeon said to me, he said, "I've just flown in from Berlin." He said, "What?" And I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "We're going to cut you down," he said, "in the middle of the rib cage there. We're going to take apart your ribs, to pull out your heart, switch it off, put you on drugs, you won't feel anything." And I couldn't believe it. I didn't feel anything. That's not a thing. I was under morphine for 5 days. He sent me home. I mean, that's incredible. And I didn't pay a penny. All of that was given to me by strangers, by passing laws of a National Health Service which made it possible for me to depend upon the comfort of strangers. Not the comfort that I'm afraid it was a rather chilly comfort of Edgerstown when I was growing up. People talked about charity, but there wasn't a great deal, let's face it. Some of you will know Edgerstown from back then. Charity, well, there might have been little bits. I mean, it's very true that everybody who left our little shop eventually went to England, often left, as I'm sure that in many other shops, left items on the ledger that had been paid for and were never paid for. Because the man, the husband in England, you have a child every year in Edgeworthstown, you go back to England, and one day in the Crown and Cricklewood, which there's a print of there somewhere, he would drink too much and he wouldn't send the postal order. So you couldn't depend. The old world, important though it was for recognition of who you were, could not provide for you, and the new world of independence does. So my pictures are celebrations of that, and in a way, little probes. I mean, the ill-fitting suit there, for instance, it shows a young man being fitted out in Ireland. There's a picture here on the end of the pillar, there's a drawing of it over there. It shows that the suit of what we were, how we relate to ourselves, was ill-fitting. We lived in the world of the soul, and the soul is immortal according to what we were taught when we were growing up. Now we live in the world of the psyche. Your psyche wants to be at ease. So you see, you probably go and have therapy of your, and all the magazines and everything else, you're supposed to have a good sex life, it's supposed to be balanced. Everything to do with the body when I was growing up was sin. Anything to do with the body, anything to do with sex, procreation. They used to church women who had babies. They went up to church and they were forgiven for having sex in order to have babies. Well, we've passed that world altogether now. And my pictures are just to try to remember that past. And try in a way, maybe not celebrate it, but just say that we do remember it. And it is important that we don't forget it, because if we forget it, we might be condemned to relive that past again. So that's what my pictures are about. And Tom here has been very kind enough to give them a display. And I want to thank him, and I hope you all enjoy them. And if there's anything that you want to know about any of them, I'll fill you in if you just come over to ask me. Thank you very much.
Well done, Bernard. Just a quick story. We're hearing so much about Ireland and England and the Irish in England and so on. We launched a book here last week on the Irish in the First World War. And there's a story in it about a priest from Cork who was captured by the Germans. And this German officer asked him where was he from, and he said he was from Cork in Ireland. So the German officer spoke to him in Irish, and the priest didn't understand him. He had no Irish at all. So the German officer marked him down as being English. And when he was released after the war, he came straight home and he learned his Irish very quickly. Anyway, thank you all for your attention and enjoy the exhibition. Thank you very much indeed.